Hey freshmen, good to see you guys, figuratively speaking. There's actually several of you that are absent for various reasons, so I'm going to send this to all of you. I'm just going to make one video. So let's see here. So on, think about it, Monday, we talked about Iraq. On Tuesday, we did a short lesson on Iran, and then I took the dialogues or the skits that you wrote in your on your test, your last test, and I printed them out, and I had your classmates essentially dress up in some of the Saudi Arabian clothes that Mrs. Sullivan dropped off for me, and they acted out the skits, and it was pretty funny. So I'm sending you the link to that video plus a few pictures, and excuse me. So make sure that you watch that. It's pretty funny. I wish you could have been here to enjoy it. But what I'm going to do right now, pretty short and quick, is I'm going to quickly review a little bit about Iraq, and then I'm going to walk through the PowerPoint that we did on Tuesday and walk you through it. So I'll send you a link to the PowerPoint as well. You'll have that. And if you can look at the PowerPoint while you can put it on split screen, you can look at the PowerPoint while you're listening to my very quick lecture. So basically, Iraq is modern day Iraq. Did I just say that? I'm sorry. I'm trying to do this quickly. Iraq, modern day Iraq is the ancient Babylonian Empire, also known as, at one point in history, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and of course those rivers are the Euphrates and the Tigris River. We've already talked a little bit about the Babylonian Empire because when we were talking about Israel and the diaspora, I showed you that scene from the movie, the Bible series, where Nebuchadnezzar came into Israel, into Jerusalem, blockaded it, surrounded it, and basically starved the people out, and then ultimately went into Jerusalem and took, either killed the inhabitants of Jerusalem, or they took some captives with them. Some of those captives were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then we watched some of the interaction between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. And I think the last thing, the little video clip we watched on Monday was the scene where Nebuchadnezzar was acting like an animal, and Daniel came in and spoke with him and said that a new king was coming. So Iraq, modern day Iraq, was where the ancient Babylonian Empire was. The capital was the city of Babylon. The city of Babylon is located in southern part of Iraq, close to the modern day capital of Baghdad, close to where the Tower of Babel was. So Iraq equals Babylonian Empire. So at the very end of class on Monday, we ran out of time to I wanted to show you a video of a ziggurat that was discovered in southern Iraq. We actually watched a video clip that I'm going to include with this in these instructions. A ziggurat is a temple that was used during pretty much the Mesopotamian era. It's where it was part of religious practices. Nebuchadnezzar actually built ziggurats or temples in the cities that he conquered. I believe right in the center of Babylon was a giant ziggurat. And it sort of looks like the pyramids in Egypt, except it has a flat top. And it was at the top of that ziggurat where the temple sacrifices would be made, or the worship services, practices took place. A ziggurat's a little bit different than a pyramid in that a pyramid is a tomb, and most of the avenues to move around inside the pyramid are actually inside. With a ziggurat, there's an outside set of stairwell that goes up to the top of the ziggurat. So there are some ziggurat-looking temples in North America and South America associated with some of the larger Native American empires like the Aztecs and the Incas. And some of you may have seen those. I've seen them on a couple of trips to Mexico. So they're pretty cool. But so anyway, that's what a ziggurat is. Ziggurat is associated with Iraq, and we just didn't get finished with that on Monday. So there's a definition in your PowerPoint slide that shows you a picture, and there's also a picture of a ziggurat that we are going to talk about. So the ziggurat of Ur, Ur is part of the Sumerian culture, Mesopotamia. It's where Abraham was born. There is a giant, massive ziggurat in the southern desert of Iraq near the ancient city of Ur. That's the reason it's called the Ziggurat of Ur, because it's close to that. And because I'm assuming because the climate and the weather, it has remained intact. It's probably 4,000 or 5,000 years old. It's very likely that that ziggurat was there when Abraham lived in the city of Ur, within eyeshot of the ziggurat. So it's kind of weird to think that the picture that you're seeing is something that Abraham potentially laid eyes on when he lived in the city of Ur. So watch the video associated with that, and make note of the definitions. I'm going to make copies of these notes and definitions for you, so you don't need to do that in addition at home, but you do need to watch this video and track with me and look at the video, look at the PowerPoint. And so then we segue to Iran. Iran, the modern country of Iran, is ancient Persia. So the Persians actually came in and conquered the Babylonians. There's a real famous story in the Bible in which the Babylonian Empire was crumbling, yet I think it was Nebuchadnezzar's son was in charge, and he threw a big banquet in Babylon, and he brought out the temple goblets from the Jewish temple, and he defiled them by using them in his celebratory dinner, whatever he was celebrating. And then all of a sudden there was this giant hand on the wall that started writing something. And I don't remember exactly what is translated. There's actually some dispute about what it actually means, but essentially there was a prophecy that the city of Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, would fall that very night. And at that point, the Persians come in and they take over the city of Babylon, and they gobble up the entire Babylonian Empire. That was, of course, part of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue as well. And so modern-day Persia, or modern-day Iran, is the ancient Persian Empire. And so the next definition that you will see there is theocracy. Iran is one of the few countries left on the planet that is actually run by religious leaders. They elect a president who is kind of a figurehead, but the religious leaders of Iran make all of the decisions, and they are very apocalyptic. They are Shia Muslims, and they have wreaked havoc all around the world by sponsoring and funding terror groups. They support Bashar al-Assad of Syria. They're the ones that have kind of propped him up all of these years. So they are bad dudes. You'll see there's a picture there of the religious leaders. They are called mullahs. Sometimes the chief leaders are called ayatollahs. And so Shia Islam has a whole different lingo for things. You're not generally going to hear a religious leader of Shia Islam referred to as an imam. So religious leaders, that's what theocracy is. The next definition is ayatollahs. And so this is, again, a word. It's probably a Farsi word. Farsi is the language of the Persian, I think that's right, of the Persian people. So Ayatollah is the title for the chief leader of the Iranian mullahs. Sometimes there are subsets, ayatollahs, but the leader is the Ayatollah. And they always have a white beard and black eyebrows, and they wear this crazy black hat. So that guy, the one that's in the middle of your slide, is the current Ayatollah of Iran. There's a flag, an Iranian flag in the picture. The picture to the right of him is the first Ayatollah of the new Iranian regime, which started in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So Iran forsook its king, gave up its king with ties to the Western world, and they brought in this crazy leader, the Ayatollah, back in 1979, and established this theocracy that has been causing troubles in the world ever since. So in Google Classroom, there is an assignment that asks you to create a fact of the day, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So make sure that you do that. And then there's just a brief set of notes on Iran, formerly Persia. This is the country that Queen Esther was married to Cyrus the Great's grandson, King Xerxes. Cyrus the Great, the first Persian king, is the one that began to allow the Jewish people to go back to Israel, the Ezras and the Zerubbabels and the Nehemiahs, and rebuild that wall and rebuild the temple. And Daniel continued to live in Persia, and he served King Cyrus and was an advisor and even a friend to him. If you remember the story in the Bible, King Cyrus was sort of tricked into throwing Daniel under the bus when some of his advisors suggested that every person in the kingdom could only pray to King Cyrus or to the Persian gods. They couldn't pray to their own gods. And so Daniel was put in a really uncomfortable situation where he was potentially going to have to not pray to God openly, but he decides to do that anyway. And Cyrus has to follow through with his edict, and he throws Daniel into the lion's den, even though he doesn't want to. And of course, God intervenes and protects Daniel. Daniel ends up living his entire life in this area of the world, and he dies in what at the time is the Persian Empire. He does not go back to Israel and help reestablish the wall and the temple and those sorts of things. He lives in exile his entire life. And Daniel is also considered a prophet within Islam, and I believe his tomb, I think, or at least what they say is his tomb, I believe is actually in Iran as well. Yes?
So my dad found this article about judicial review and the...
Sweet.
And he thought you might like it.
I would love it. Thank you.
He talks about John Marshall and all that.
Oh, cool. I wonder what newspaper this is. That looks like ours. Okay, thank you. I'm a nerd. Sorry. One of my seniors came in and brought me in a magazine for my history class. So sorry. They probably thought I was in here talking to myself, like, who's Mrs. Campbell talking to? Anyway, let's see here. So Queen Esther was married to a Persian king, just to give you some biblical reference. And of course, the people of Iran are Persian. They are not Arab. One of the stories that I told the kids was that my family used to host international students, or we would sort of adopt one when they came here. We didn't do a very good job of it, but we tried. But anyway, one year we were over at NWAC, Northwest Arkansas Community College, meeting with some of the international students, and there was a young lady there. They all went around the table introducing themselves, and then there are a lot of Saudi Arabian students. Anyway, she introduced herself as, I don't remember what her name was. I'll say Esther. Hi, my name is Esther. I'm from Iran. I'm Persian. She said it real like, I am Persian, and you better remember that I am Persian. I was like, okay. So the people of Iran are very proud of their Persian heritage. It sets them apart from other people in the area. They are not technically sons of Ishmael. They are not Arab, although they are Muslim. And so they're very proud of their Persian heritage on the scale of history. So they're Persian and they are not Arab, which also puts them at odds with the Sunni members of the Muslim community from Saudi Arabia and other places. Capital city is Tehran. It is the largest city in the Persian Gulf region. There's 12 million people that live there. To compare, like in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, there are about 8 million people, so it's quite a bit larger. And then the last point on this slide is that they have sponsored terror around the world. We've talked about a couple of those places. The only place on this list that we haven't talked about is an organization or a terrorist group called Hezbollah, which operates out of Lebanon. Lebanon is just north of Israel, and so they create a lot of problems for Israel. Iran hates Israel. They refer to Israel as the little devil and the United States as the big devil. We're all infidels in their eyes, and so they would love to get rid of Israel. Israel, I would say, actively pushes back against Iran, especially the concern that Iran will develop a nuclear program. And so that is part of the foreign policy associated with America, Iran, Israel, trying to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons and creating havoc in that area of the world, because so many of the Middle Eastern countries are considered enemies of Iran, or at least the Iranians consider them enemies. So the other couple of terrorist organizations that we've already talked about are the Houthis in Yemen, and then Hamas in Israel. When we watch the pictures of the bombs and the tunnels and all of that stuff coming out of the Gaza Strip, that is predominantly from Hamas, which is funded by Iran. So they've created a lot of problems around the world. The next slide is a picture of Cyrus the Great. In class, we dipped back into the Bible movie, and we watched the scene where Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, and then Cyrus runs to his rescue, releases him from the den, and announces that he's going to send the Jewish people back to Israel. So that's kind of where we finished. It was short and sweet. And the rest of the class period, we did the skits. So I want you to watch the skits, watch this video, watch the PowerPoint in class on Thursday and Friday. So Thursday for my 9A group and Friday for, yeah, I guess tomorrow, Friday will be my 9B group. We watched Aladdin. We just kind of chilled. Kids brought in some snacks for themselves, some breakfast food, and we just turned the lights off and watched Aladdin. It was a good time. So kind of a segue. So I believe that tomorrow is the last day of the quarter. So I'm going to be switching seating assignments and stuff. So when you get back, you'll be sitting in a different spot. So anyway, follow instructions on Google Classroom. Make sure you reply with the homework that I'm gonna have some Google Docs in there that you need to respond to. And I think that's it. If I think of anything else, I will let you know. But have a good weekend. Make sure you do Google Classroom due on Friday at noon. And I will create another video next week after I'm finished with the classes. So see ya.